Amanda Packard, and this is my interview for Advocacy for Policy Change in the U.S. And I have someone from our community that provides resources, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Misty. I am a drug and alcohol counselor at On Track Rogue Valley here in Grants Pass, Oregon.
What is the population that you serve?
So the population that I serve is primarily underprivileged population, addicts, many times trying to get their life back together, many times searching for housing opportunities, employment opportunities, childcare opportunities, and quite often working alongside of DHS and or the probation or parole
department. Yeah. So the way that I'm going to operate this today is I'm going to use myself and my experience as one of the examples, coming from a person who has experienced homelessness and addiction and kind of the piece that involves that. And then Misty's going to answer the questions through the lens of the people that she serves. So she's going to ask me the questions first, and we'll just take it from there.
Okay. All right, Amanda, what do you remember about the housing situation from when you were younger?
So when I was younger, I remember I grew up in a house with my great-grandmother, and she always owned her home. So I really didn't feel the effects of the housing crisis until much later in life.
Okay. So what has your experience been with obtaining housing as an adult?
So as an adult, my experience was really difficult. Living in Grants Pass, Oregon, you have to make 3 times whatever the rent is in order to move in there. And we have the 3rd highest cost for rentals compared to the wage gap in the nation here. And so I remember it being really difficult, especially starting out as a new parent. We were living on $428 a month TANF and $400 a month in food stamps, and that's all we had. And our rent was $650 for the house we wanted to get into at that point in time. And so we were supposed to come up with first, last, and security deposit, and we were supposed to be making 3 times that amount. So it was really disabling, to say the least. It was really hard to establish a positive home for our kids, and that's on top of being an addict and being on and off using and having DHS involvement and experiencing homelessness and all the emotions that come around that with not feeling worthy. And then you have, the criminality that came along with that, and that added another factor, because then if you have a background check, then you're written off the list, and so then you have to have somebody who hopefully cares about you enough to sign on with you. So it was just a real struggle.
Sure. So you pretty much just went over what the 3rd question would be, and that is, what do you think about the price for rentals compared to how much people are paid in this area?
Yep, it makes it impossible for people to. It is literally, it costs less to buy a home and to pay a mortgage here than it does to rent.
What do you think about the housing situation here in Josephine County?
So the housing situation here in Josephine County sucks. I feel like our people who are underrepresented or people who are experiencing homelessness don't have a chance. I feel like it's a funnel towards either be homeless, die, or leave. And I don't necessarily feel like that's an accident. I mean, everybody's moving here from California. I feel like people who have money get to stay, and if you don't, then you have to leave.
What do you think the state government or county should do about the housing crisis here in Grants Pass?
I think that it needs to be addressed. I think that there needs to be policies put in place that help people with felonies to be able to rent, somehow puts restrictions on how much you can require of a person to make in order for them to get into housing. I think that that would be a really positive change. And I also think that having more facilities available for people who can't afford housing, period, so that we can get homeless people off the streets would be positive.
And do you think that the population you serve and or are going to be serving are more disadvantaged than mainstream society in obtaining housing?
And so for that question, I wanted to speak about my experience being an addict and the barriers that that put in place for me, because, and especially having kids, because see, not only was I was an addict trying to obtain housing so that I could get clean, but nobody would rent to me because I wasn't clean. Nobody would, they wouldn't, they didn't want to let me have my kids in my possession because I didn't have a house. Yet I couldn't get a house because I couldn't stay clean. So it was just this terrible cycle. And I do want to say that we do have a few, literally three transitional houses here in this community that helps people that are struggling with recovery. But that was a barrier for me. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I need to be careful in the way that I ask these because it's through a different lens. So, do your clients ever talk about housing or from when they were younger?
Absolutely. A lot of the clients that I serve come from, they come from a little bit more of a deprived background. A lot of them, when we look at drugs and alcohol and substance use, it is something that we see as being hereditary. So a lot of times we're looking at poverty parents raising then poverty children, because that's just the culture that they're brought up in. So once they are of age and capable of getting out on their own, a lot of times they have already struggled with a substance use disorder as even minors. And a lot of times, due to the environment that they're exposed to early on, by the time that they're 18, they've already received criminal charges. And so then it makes it very, very difficult for them to get on their feet, A, with employment, and B, with having criminal charges. So our community in general doesn't offer a lot of resources as far as, so back in the day, like when I first started researching this and when I first started exploring like my own path, being a young teen mom, and my rental history was, we had very, very few what we considered blacklist renters back in the day, and basically what that is felony friendly. So one of the issues that we come up against is we see individuals get out of prison. They've worked a hardcore program, an MRT or a DBT program in prison, then they get out and they engage in intensive outpatient services, a 2.1 LOC, and then they're successful with that. They've followed all of the criteria as per their probation or their parole, and yet then there's this housing difficulty because they're felons and they can't find people that are felon friendly to rent to them. And so that definitely causes this rift. It's something that we work on constantly, because a lot of times they hit a brick wall, 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 and then they go back to what they know. And so yeah, it's a tragedy.
Yeah, I agree. So, what's the experience that your clients have shared with you in obtaining housing as an adult?
So one of the barriers that I very often see with my clients is that, once again, coming out of a successful treatment program, working their treatment, we do, as you mentioned, we have some transitional housing opportunities here in Josephine County, but there's an extensive wait time. And as you mentioned, a lot of our clients are working alongside of DHS. So what that means is, here they are, they're calling and they're checking, and they're calling and they're checking, and they're calling and they're checking, and they're finishing their groups and they're doing everything that they need to do. But there's this limited space available for placement, and they don't get to have their babies back with them until they find appropriate housing, but they're having a hard time finding appropriate housing because of criminal charges or because of DHS involvement or whatever the situation might be. But definitely the wait time, the wait list that's involved in obtaining resources is detrimental sometimes for the clients that I serve.
I agree, and I'd like to tag on to that with the HUD too, because we also have HUD
right.
that will help people who are experiencing financial difficulties.
Absolutely, and you can as a resource.
Right. However, if you've ever had any kind of felonies, especially pertaining to drugs or any kind of violent crimes, that disqualifies you immediately.
Yeah, and with HUD, the wait time it's intense.
I heard something like over a year.
It fluctuates, so sometimes for whatever reason it's like bada bing, bada boom, and they wait 3 months and all of a sudden they're approved. But other times, just depending on what's going on with our community resources and our financial situations within the community, there's up to a year. I've seen 1.5 years.
Wow, it's intense. Yeah. Okay, next question is, what do you think about the price for rentals compared to how much people are paid in this area? And you could answer that yourself or through the lens of, do your clients talk about this? Is that a struggle?
Well, I think that's just pretty universal. I mean, I absolutely can relate to that on my own experiences, and I absolutely have clients that come in, and that's one of the things that we're learning to use coping skills around, and actually counsel, because it's a stress factor. And it's not just a stress factor for recovering individuals. I think it's a stress factor for anybody that's alive and trying to exist in the culture that we live in. And yeah, absolutely. So if you're making, let's just say, and this is still considered poverty level. So if you're by yourself, a single parent making $2,500 a month, which is honestly pushing it in this community for most people, but let's just say $2,500 a month, and a 1-bedroom, maybe a 2-bedroom, and a 1-bath home is running $1,200 to $1,300 a month.
And that it is.
And you're then looking at your utilities. You're not left with much for survival, for basic needs. So yeah, I think that the cost of living is intense, and once again, the resources that are available for the more underprivileged population are lacking.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I agree. So we kind of just covered the housing situation here in Josephine County. Do you have any ideas of maybe what our county or the state or government could or should do about the housing crisis here in Grants Pass?
So I know that some of the things that are currently being implemented, and I think that it's like pre-housing crisis, but it absolutely is part of the preventative piece. I think in the long run is there are more residential beds, more residential housing programs, including detox facilities being opened. And that's going to help just long term as far as people having the stabilization they need to get on their feet. But as far as implementing a solution, I mean, lower housing rates, more opportunities for our underprivileged population, maybe implementing more felony-friendly renters, maybe walking clients, such as the clients that I serve, or even mental health individuals, people that are engaged in like intensive mental health, like walking them through like what it means to be financially stable, like what it means to be financially secure, what it means to follow through with responsibilities. And then when they're eligible, making that an opportunity that's presentable to them. Just as successful completion of like drug and alcohol treatment is something that we offer. I think that And with that being said, a lot of our clients, once they have successfully completed drug and alcohol treatment, then there's a housing opportunity that they can apply for. How long they're gonna have to wait for that opportunity is another story, but it then makes them eligible. And I think that if we had more programs available for clients that are eligible, it would make a huge difference in
What
our
if
community.
rental companies partnered with drug
Right.
and alcohol rehabilitation
Right.
places? Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, so I think that we see a little bit of that. There's a little bit of that in the community, but not nearly as much as is needed. And I think that it's important to remember when we're talking about the recovery community, and when we're talking about those that suffer with mental health, we're not just talking about adults that, for one reason or another, have chose their destiny on housing and making that a difficult situation for them, but we're also talking about the children that are alongside of them and the opportunities that those kids are being given. So at the end of the day, putting a roof over our children's heads is always, and I think always should be, our primary concern.
I completely agree. And also keeping the family with them.
Yeah, keeping them unified.
Yeah, that's
Right.
vital,
Absolutely.
if at all possible.
Absolutely.
This is our last question. Do you think that the population you serve are more disadvantaged than mainstream society in obtaining housing, or just like the normal everyday renter?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So a large percentage of my, this is a really touchy subject for me, because a large portion of the clients that I serve are homeless. And when I say homeless, I don't mean like couch surfing. I mean homeless, like living out on the streets. And there's nothing for me personally that hits my heart than when you have a client that comes in as a self-referred individual in the middle of winter who's homeless, and they're ready to change their life, and they're ready to engage in whatever level of treatment can be provided for them. And you see them 5 days a week, and 5 days a week you say goodbye to them knowing that they're going back out onto the streets and being exposed to the elements that keep them sick. They're absolutely at a disadvantage with the criminal backgrounds that they have, with substance abuse and sometimes mental health severity that makes it very difficult for them to obtain the resources, or maybe even communicate the need for the resources that would be necessary in order for them to obtain basic needs, like a roof over their head.
And I'm glad that you're touching on the subject of people experiencing homelessness, because that's something that out here in our community we've really lacked on. I mean, there's a few organizations that go out and take hats and jackets and feed, and we do have food banks and such. However, our homeless people are really, really struggling, and they have, especially 25 and over, they have the least amount of resources available to them than anybody else in this community who may be experiencing homelessness. And so at some point in my life, I want to be part of that change. Not sure how it's going to happen, but I would like to. So thank you so much for being here and doing this interview with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, classmates. I hope that was a good enough interview and fulfilled all my teacher's requirements. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.